Good morning, everyone.
Oh,
Happy Saturday. This is my first 10 a.m. on a Saturday book event, so this is very exciting. My hair shows it. I'm sorry. My name is Morgan Murray. Welcome to the Atlantic Book Awards Festival. I wrote my first book last year, so I'm the old surly veteran on this panel, so I get to host this year's first book award, the Margaret and John Savage First Book Award for Fiction nominees. And I'll introduce them to you to them in a sec. It's 10 a.m. I'm going to stumble all over here. But it's also exciting because each of their books kind of shares a thematic element in that there's some mysterious crime happening in small towns. And so we're going to get into that this morning. I wanted to just, before we begin, mention that what year of the pandemic is this? 5, 7? We've all been on Zoom in our basements for a really long time. And as lovely as it is that we can Zoom in from Cape Breton and Lunenburg and Halifax and Dartmouth and share this morning, it sometimes dulls the interactivity you get to have with the audience. So if you're listening and watching from home, there's a chat feature on Zoom. Please use the chat so we know you're there. Ask questions, make comments, put in emoji, smiley faces if you're happy and laughing, put in mad faces if you disagree with the host. So we can be a little bit interactive. Throughout the event, we're going to have some discussions. There we go. We got our first happy face. Lovely. Marianne, you're the MVP. So chat in the chat. And as the event goes on, we're going to have discussion and I'm going to keep an eye on the chat. And so you can interact with us and ask questions as we go. You don't need to wait till the end. And so we'll do that. So chat away. Look at all of these lovely people chatting. I heard a rumor that there's 40 people registered for a 10 a.m. Saturday morning book event. God love you. You're the most wonderful people on earth. So before we begin, we're going to start with the land acknowledgement. And like I'm getting tired of Zoom, I'm getting a little bit tired of sort of scripted generic land acknowledgements. But I think they're really important to do. And so I wanted to try something a little different at 10 a.m. on a Saturday. I'm really hung up on this 10 a.m. on Saturday, by the way, so I'll probably say it 100 times. But I wanted to do sort of personal Indigenous land acknowledgements because we're all over. There's people from Pennsylvania. Oh, my goodness. So I'm going to, as the said out loud land acknowledgement, acknowledge my connection to Indigenous land in this country and how I ended up here. And I encourage everybody in the chat to do the same. So you can just say sort of the territory or land that you're from and what treaty, if there is a treaty that kind of governs that territory. So I'm of mixed European settler descent. I grew up in Treaty 6 territory in what is now central Alberta. I'm here because my ancestors were various refugees from Europe, settlers, and they were given land for free, land that wasn't theirs or the government that gave it to them to give, but they got land for free. So that has greatly benefited my life. And right now I'm in Mabu, Cape Breton, or Mulapugukeg is the Mi'kmaq word, and my pronunciation is terrible, on the island of Unama'ki, or as we know now, Cape Breton. Unama'ki is one of the 7 traditional territories of Mi'kmaq, and it's the unceded land of the Mi'kmaq people. And that unceded part is very important. In the 18th century, the Mi'kmaq and the Indigenous people of this region signed a series of treaties with the British Crown. They're called the Peace and Friendship Treaties that kind of set the conditions for peaceful coexistence and the sharing of the land. They were not treaties of cessation. They were treaties of how we can all get along because we weren't. And then for the several hundred years since, we've, as settlers, have done a horrible job of withholding our end of those treaties. And so there's a lot of talk these days about how we're all treaty people, but really the settlers are the treaty people because we're here and we're allowed to sort of flourish on this land because of the treaties. And the treaties more than any British North America Act or the Charter of Rights and Freedoms or any constitutional document of Canada. The treaties are the foundational documents of Canada, and we do a terrible job of upholding them. And to add to that, we've leaned pretty hard on colonialism and genocide for 400 years. And so I just want to acknowledge that we're all here because we're all treaty people. And so please, in the chat, mention where you are. Like I said, I'm in Unama'ki, and I'm here because of the Peace and Friendship Treaty. So if you're able to add that to the chat, that would be great. And so that was my weird stumbling land acknowledgement. But now, after that heavy start to our fun Saturday morning book event, I want to thank you all for coming once again, and just have a couple of quick announcements. This is, as you know, because you're here, this is part of the Atlantic Book Awards Book Festival, which is really exciting part of a week long of events leading up to the Atlantic Book Awards on Thursday. This is a very exciting year because, one, on Thursday night, there's a fancy gala at the Halifax Central Library, in person, people breathing on each other again. This is exciting, where the awards will be handed out. Last year, I just had to sweat in my living room watching on Zoom. So these three nominees get to do it in real life. That'll be exciting. There's also another gala on Monday at the Halifax City Hall, ceremony for the Nova Scotia Book Awards, which is the first time that's happening, and that's exciting. The ceremony itself is sold out, so you can't get any of the free cheese there, but you can watch on Zoom. And if you go to atlanticbookawards.ca, you can check out all the details for that. And this event is being co-presented by the Cabot Trails Writers Festival, which for my money is one of the best writer festivals going. And I'm not biased at all, even though it's just half an hour down the road from where I am. It's a lovely festival. It happens in the fall each year on Cabot Trail when the fall colors are going strong, and it's a wonderful thing. This year it's September 22nd, that weekend. And you can go to cabottrailwritersfestival.com to find out about that. So take in a week of events this week, go to the gala, have a great time, and then take the summer off, catch your breath, and then come up to Cape Breton for Cabot Trail in September. That'll be great. So, all right, let's get into it here. This year, the Margaret and John Savage First Book Award for Fiction is eyeball deep in talent and coincidentally mystery, like I said, and crime. And so we're going to talk all about the murder and the mayhem and the shocking secrets and the questionable police and all the craziness that happens in these three brilliant books. So just quickly to introduce the nominees, our three guests. We have Alexandra Harrington, and who's nominated for her book, The Last Time I Saw Her. C.S. Porter is nominated for his book, Beneath Her Skin. And Colin Sweets Arsenault is nominated for Short Mercy. Applause, applause, applause. So if any of you have read these books already, please write glowing reviews in the chat and convince everybody else watching to read them as well. And so to start off, we're going to hear a little bit about the books from the authors themselves, and we're going to hear a little bit of the book. So they're going to tell us about their book, and then they're going to read a little bit, and that'll be very exciting. And first up, we're going to go with Alexandra. Alexandra is a writer living in Halifax, and she's worked as a restaurant manager, a server, and a fiction editor. And now she's an award-winning YA mystery novelist. How does that sound, Alexandra?
I don't think I won anything. I don't know. I think
nomination is a win.
Nominated.
You're
I'll take
award
it.
Winner.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, I'll take that. Fine.
We write fiction. We're here to sell books. We don't need to
exactly.
about semantics. So welcome, congratulations on writing a novel. That's an amazing accomplishment, and congratulations for being award-winning.
Thank you.
Welcome. So can you tell us about The Last Time I Saw Her, and the juiciest bit, but without any spoilers? Don't spoil.
Yes. Okay. So this is my book, The Last Time I Saw Her. It's a YA mystery novel, I guess. this book started when I was 13 years old, and much more much more melodramatic than I am now, even though I still am a little bit. But this was meant and very much inspired by sort of the Nancy Drew books that I grew up reading, and then kind of tangled in with those, you know, dramatic CW shows you watch when you're 14 and sort of that thing. So the root of this really is the very fraught teenage kind of friendships and relationships that are really feel like the center of the universe when you're 17 and 18, the age that the characters are. So it is a mystery kind of throughout, but at the core, I really wanted to showcase this incredibly complicated and all-consuming friendship between the two young women in the book. So it's set in River John, which is a real small village on the North Shore of Nova Scotia. This version, as I was saying before we started, is a lot more dramatic and crime-ridden than the actual River John, which is a very beautiful place, kind of like a hidden gem, I find, or I feel like it's a hidden gem on the North Shore of Nova Scotia. But yeah, I really set out to write a book about, you know, women friendships. So that's kind of what I always wanted the core to be, even when I started it so much younger with an entirely different plot. It was always the same characters and like these two women at the very root of it. So I am happy that I kind of stuck to that over the 10 years it took me to write this. It has changed a lot. I kind of like grew up with the characters because I was 14 or something when I started writing this, and it came out when I was 25, 24. So so that is kind of my spiel. Very much Nancy Drew inspired, and I stand by that. I stand by all the, you know, middle grade and Hardy Boys and the YA mysteries that I really grew up with. So shall I read a little bit now?
Go for it.
Okay.
Sounds great.
I'm going to read from the very beginning because it's kind of kicks off a roller coaster from the very beginning. So not to get into any like spoilers, because it's like once you're in, it gets very tangled. So we're just going to start a little bit at the beginning, and hopefully that will entice people a little bit, kind of doing an abridged version of the first chapter. Okay, I'm nervous. It was hot for June. Well, July, Charlotte corrected herself, the word rolling out of her head slow and thick. June had burned itself out quietly, almost like smoke slipping away, and she'd been occupied with things other than the days of the week. Charlotte went mostly by the numbers. Prom was 6 days ago, graduation was 4. Everyone had to be completely moved out of housing as of 1 day ago. Charlotte pressed the heel of her hand to the top of her cheekbone, trying to wipe away a streak of sweat without smudging whatever pitiful bits were left of her makeup. Here, the summer air usually pulled back and forth the same way the tide did. Living beside the sea usually meant a crisp, salty breeze that shimmered between layers of sunshine. But tonight it was humid and the air was heavy, honey instead of salt. Fitting, Charlotte thought. Today was Sophie Thompson's 18th birthday. She pulled herself up the narrow walkway of the Thompsons' bungalow for what was probably the millionth time in her life. Morning before school, sunny Saturday afternoons, sneaking back under blooming darkness 3 minutes short of curfew, it was a familiar path. But this was the first time Charlotte felt like she shouldn't be here. She flicked her phone awake. It was late. She'd missed the earlier bus, and the only other one to the North Shore had been running late. So not only was Charlotte Romer crashing Sophie Thompson's birthday party, she was also way more than fashionably behind schedule. River John buzzed around her like it always did, a combination of lazy summer bugs, the easy swell of an ocean that was never too far, and the worn-out power lines overhead. It was a familiar heartbeat, and she had missed it. Looking back down the road, she saw the tail lights from the bus had long since disappeared. No retreat, surrender only. She pushed open the unlocked door and stepped inside, feeling the familiar surroundings shudder into place. A year ago, she would have been one of the vital working parts of Sophie's birthday party, but she'd been here for 30 seconds and already felt like she triggered a burglar alarm. Charlotte immediately decided that showing up here uninvited was probably one of her worst ideas this year, certainly in the top 3. Unexpectedly leaving town without a word to anyone was definitely up there too, followed closely by turning up again now, a year later. Dave Mackenzie from her 11th grade history class was the first to spot her. Charlotte could feel the heat creeping up her neck. Without taking his eyes off of her, Dave Mackenzie inched sideways and jabbed at Mitchell Mackenzie, no relation, capital K Mackenzie, who was playing DJ. All the kids in River John pretty much grew up together because families didn't really move to the North Shore of Nova Scotia from anywhere else. They just grew there from the start. Mitchell Mackenzie yanked the aux cord out of his iPhone and looked around. The party came to a crashing halt as the music stopped. A group of girls in the kitchen looked annoyed at being disrupted, their heads swiveled like tiny owls trying to source the interruption. A cluster of guys near the back door exchanged uneasy looks, checking their phones for the time. In River John, parties were only ever interrupted by the sheriff's department when they raged too late into the night. But then people started looking at Charlotte, and the feeling in the room shifted to something else completely. It was like the realization of who exactly was crashing her party set in Sophie's jaw first, and then worked its way up to her eyes. Charlotte watched Sophie's eyes narrow from across the room, lids sliding down until they were just little slits of gray blue underneath. Someone had to go first, and that's it. So it the setup is sort of this very unceremonious homecoming after our main character Charlotte has been gone for a year, and she's left kind of a wake of broken relationships in her past, so she sort of has to mitigate that.
I'm
And
hooked.
that's tough. Thank you.
Just keep reading. I got nothing to do today, so just go till the end. I want to know what happens.
There's a
That's
lot that
great.
happens, and I chose to read that part because all along, even like from my very, very first draft, this first chapter was always the exact same. It was always Charlotte coming home to Sophie's birthday party. So this has been in my brain for like 10 years now. So
Wait, you wrote that chapter when you were 13?
I mean, like it's been rewritten since, but it was always the same scene. Yeah.
I feel bad about my adolescence because I was not writing novels when I was
Well,
13.
I wouldn't call it a novel when I was when I was 13, but it was
It's novel now.
there was chapters. Yeah. It was always the scene of, you know, her coming home to this very frigid reception, and which is not undeserved, honestly, after you kind of figure out what transpired. But yeah, that was always it. So that was always the beginning, and pretty much every other thing about this book changed since then, except for that opening. So
That's something else. Well, congratulations. Thank you for that. That was great.
thank you.
So we're going to come back to Alexandra in a second. And if you got any questions for her, throw them in the chat. Oh, there's so much love in the chat for your book. This is great. All the Sarahs have read it and loved it. This is great. I'm loving the chat. Great work, everyone. So next up, like his book, C.S. Porter is a mystery. Is his name even C.S.? Is he British, American, Nova Scotian? Nobody knows. Or does he know? He says he was once involved in a crime investigation, but was he the investigator, the victim, the criminal? Who can say? Is he joining us from his home in Lunenburg, or is he in prison? Is he in his police cruiser? I don't know. I'll never tell. But we do know that his first novel, Beneath Her Skin, is also an award winner. It's nominated for this award, as well as the Howard Angle. It won the Howard Angle Award for Best Crime Novel Set in Canada, which is a huge honor. So congratulations, CS, on your nomination for this award, on writing a novel, and for the Angle Award. That's a big thing. Can you tell us about Beneath Her Skin and read us a little bit of it, please?
Yeah. It's a dark psychological thriller, I guess. It's unlike Alexandra's, it's more directed at the events and then the people around the events. It doesn't start with well, it does start with the people. I guess any story has to start with the people. But I think the intention was to get the reader involved in such a way as morality, you know, like all these things become questions. So I think at the end, you're meant to feel, the intention is that you kind of like the bad guys to get away with it. You know? Oh. So I probably picked the wrong piece. I thought that the conceit of this was because we're all from small towns, or our books are from small towns, that I'd read a little bit off the beginning that describes the small town, if that helps. I'm wondering if I should say more about the book. It's a city detective comes to a small town and has to enlist the help of local law enforcement. And then we just the line starts to shatter, and we just go running through the town until we find out what events took place in the past.
Okay.
So this is Kess. Kess Morris is the lead character. She drove along the town's main street leading to the back harbor. Though the summer season hadn't started yet, the narrow road was already teeming with tourists, visiting the galleries, restaurants, and curio shops. One day of sun and people were already fevered. Shopping had never been something Kess enjoyed, but she'd love to be sitting on one of the outdoor patios, sipping a cold beer. She turned up a steep hill, past an impressive old inn that was formerly a sea captain's house. This was a wealthy town, proud of its fishing, boat building, and rum running heritage. The demographic had been shifting in recent years to foreign investors and summer residents who were buying up the coastline and driving prices beyond the reach of locals. That fine line of needing tourists to survive, but at costs that might be too high. The locals still had a reputation of being fiercely independent, and despite their friendly charm, wouldn't hesitate to tell an outsider to bugger off. So that's Lunenburg. But I never mentioned the town's name. It's, what if something like what's in the book actually happened here in the past and I didn't know? I wouldn't want to be caught out on that. So.
Very cool. I'm intrigued. And it sounds a lot like my small town. The locals are never afraid to tell people to bugger off.
Which is good, right?
That's awesome. Thank you. So next up we have Colin Sweets Arsenault. And Colin, we've just met, but I hate you already. I'm sorry. Because you're the most productive human I've ever met. You have a radio show every day. You have 2 podcasts.
Yeah.
You have a soon-to-be wife, Becky. I got questions about that. And 2 cats.
Mhm.
And somehow you managed to find the time to write a novel, not just any novel, but an award-winning novel, Short Mercy, which is nominated for this first book award, but is also the Robbie Robertson Dartmouth Book Award for Fiction. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And all that you do. I'm green with envy. If you have time, could you tell us about your book and read us a little bit of it?
For what it's worth, having cats really does not add to my workload. They just sit around, and in fact, they bring me down to a level of comfort, I think. Thank you so much. It's interesting, I think, that this panel is so focused on mystery. It's interesting for me anyway, because it sounds like a cliche, but I had no intention of writing a mystery book. And I didn't necessarily think it was a mystery book. I think it could be assigned to a lot of different genres. It's a buddy adventure. It's a coming of age story. I think I set out to write a Western. The first thing I conceived in 2018 when I started writing was that I really wanted to create a story around a mythic outlaw, like in a Western kind of sense. What if some mysterious black hat rode into town and robbed a bunch of banks, and now 30, 40 years later, nobody's even really sure if that's what happened, but we love to assign blame to that guy anytime something goes wrong. And so the story centers around Jim Short, who is a lonely, kind of hermited, stubborn, used book salesman in the fictional town of Heathering, Nova Scotia, which is kind of a dead town. It's not a real town, but I think it would be familiar to a lot of people. It's not one of these beautiful maritime small towns with like a canal running through it and expensive Airbnbs. It's kind of dead, and in part because of Jim Short's bookstore. He won't move in spite of developers' insistence that he sell the store and move uptown so that they can build a condo. And so everybody around town kind of resents Jim. And then one night, his bookstore is robbed. Very strange to rob a bookstore and not like a gas station or a bank or a liquor store or something. And so right there, the story doesn't totally add up. But as Jim is trying to connect the dots, his only way into the mind of a criminal is to seek out help from the local teenage ne'er-do-well, Mackenzie, who robs convenience stores of cigarettes and Pepsi products. And so they team up and they go on a little road trip in search of redemption. I'm not going to read from the beginning of the book because I just told you what happens in the beginning. I'm going to read an abridged version of chapter 8, which is where we meet Mackenzie. On paper, Mackenzie White dropped out of Heathering Secondary on her 16th birthday. But in reality, it was sooner than that. The school had a small student body, and so her departure might have seemed considerable, but things didn't feel especially different, as her presence had only been an occasional grace for a number of semesters anyway. In lieu of classes, most days she just drove. Her car was a 1976 Buick Skylark in midnight blue, though Mackenzie argued it was black for one simple reason. She sincerely believed it was one of the vehicles involved in the Great Cape Breton bank heist of 1978. And she bragged about it to anyone who would listen. Hey kid, she'd bait lollipop-toting youngsters, you ever seen a real-life getaway car? And the child's mother would take his hand and rush him along, sometimes uttering, pay no attention, Dylan, or some equivalent. This spoke well to Mackenzie's role in the community. She was never anyone's main priority. The police and teachers had all but lost interest, as had her mother entirely. By the time Mackenzie was 17, she depended on no one. The only person who had never lost patience with her was her grandfather, Jeffrey White, the old mechanic from the woods off Exit 6. He gave Mackenzie her meals, her last safe sleeping place, and eventually her car, but only as his last will after dying from lung cancer shortly after her birthday. He had given his granddaughter everything she ever valued, not the least of which was a wealth of tales about his wild days running scams and arranging shady deals. He had the stories down to the finest details, and Mackenzie believed every word. When he died, the paper ran a lean obituary recalling his solitary work in an auto shop and his quiet retirement. They wrote that he was survived by his son Carl, who nobody in Heathering, including Jeffrey, had seen in a decade, his daughter-in-law Lindy, who was known to have not gotten along with him, and his beloved granddaughter Mackenzie, who cried when she found she'd been listed last and hadn't cried since. Instead, she drove. She knew the highways by the shapes of the trees and the bright orange markings on the roadside gravel. She knew the potholes, the line fades, the rockiest ditches. She rarely stopped in other towns, and only ever to visit the can or swipe jerky or a Snickers. She never went as far as the city, but spent the afternoons burning gas on the full tree-lined loop. She knew the best times to steal from self-service pumps at every major truck stop, and she only drove fast. Every town has a Mackenzie White, a rule-rejecting, ambition-lacking kid who's lost in the world as a result of having been given no map to start with, an ugliness to those who had it easier and a burden to those who could help. Every Mackenzie White wears invisible armor over their peach-soft skin. Everyone's spirit is critically fragile, but scarcely nourished for the belief it's broken already. Every town has at least one, but most have more. And in those towns, at least they have each other. Heathering's Mackenzie White was truly alone. Thank you.
Excellent.
Dang, you guys. I'm glad I'm not the jury for this award, because I want to just listen to you guys read these books all day. That I'm hooked. I'm ready. I'm intrigued. We have a question from the chat for Colin. Someone named Becky is asking, what does soon to be wife mean in your bio?
Actually, it says on the back of the book that she is my wife, because I've been trying to marry her for like 3.5 years, but there's this pandemic thing.
Oh.
And so I figured when the book came out, I'll definitely be married by then, but then we had to pick another date. So she is my soon to be wife for another 6.5 days.
Oh, congratulations. Wow.
Thank
You
you.
have a busy week coming up. Typical Colin, doing everything
know.
at once.
I know. What's wrong with him?
That's amazing. So there's Sarah Butland, you're my hero. There's questions rolling in the chat. So yeah, for the next half hour, we're going to chat. We're going to ask questions. I've got some in my pocket in case I need them, but they're really bad questions, you guys. So ask better ones in the chat and I'll make sure they get to the authors. Jump in with comments or thoughts if you want. And yeah, we're just going to chat books. And Sarah has the first real question. She says, congratulations to Colin and Becky. Absolutely. Alexandra spoke about Nancy Drew inspiring her writing. Colin and CS, what inspired yours? And Colin, why did you pick Western? So we'll start with Colin, and then CS will go over to you.
Yeah, I really was. I didn't have genre in mind. not mystery or Western or otherwise, but I think I wanted to write a story about a mythic outlaw. And that seemed to align with the Western genre. And then as I got writing, the book becomes nothing of the sort. First of all, it takes place in the East and in modern day. And so it has notes of that, but it becomes something on its own entirely. It has crime in it, so I guess you could call it crime fiction. It has mystery in it, so you could call it mystery fiction, but I didn't necessarily choose a genre. Is that the question, or did you ask me what inspired me to write?
Both. What are you right?
Oh goodness, I don't know. Other good books?
So,
I'm sorry.
what's an example of a good book that you really
Well,
admire?
I try never to miss an opportunity to say publicly that my favorite book ever is Holes, which I realize is a kid's book, but I think is a masterpiece. I think it's as sophisticated as like as anything written for adults. I think formatically it's kind of like that because Short Mercy is it's a brief family saga. So every time we catch up with our main characters, we also devote a chapter to talking about their parents and grandparents and how there may be some overlap. And then, you know, there's some slight mysticism happening as well. So I think there's like a formatic relationship to that book.
Awesome, thank you. And CS, what's your inspiration? What
Oh, I'm quite the opposite in that regard. I wanted to write a mystery. I wanted to write a full on, you know, like pounding mystery. I didn't know if I could, but I wanted to try. I love Joe Nesbo, Kate Atkinson, Ken Bruin. When I traveled a lot, I used to travel an awful lot with work, and a mystery was always in my bag, because you didn't. I mean, you know, narratives about solving problems, I suppose, and the problems were very apparent in mysteries. They could be complex, but they were apparent, and so it was something that you could put down and pick up the next night, and it was fine. It wasn't like reading like a thick novel like a Paragon, you know. So it was just it was something I wanted to do. I wanted to try.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, we got another question. Oh, they're coming in fast and furious. All right. Olivia asks to all the panelists, based on your choices to name or not name or to create entirely fictional East Coast towns, why did you feel that the right decision for your novel, and what were the challenges or benefits that you experienced while writing or post-publication to do so? So yes, you kind of mentioned that you didn't want to get in Dutch from the locals for naming a crime. Alexandra, why what were the challenges? What has sort of been the outcome of basing all this juicy drama in River John?
I think like originally, like it just happened, like I just picked it because that was the only small town that I was familiar, like that I had been visiting consistently throughout my life and was like super familiar with. And I've like even experimented with, like at one point the draft was set in Halifax and it just worked better in like a small town, because I think mysteries kind of lend themselves to those very like microcosm little settings with like a, you know, intricate cast or like eclectic characters, that sort of thing. And I mean, I think it kind of could have gone either way. Like I did obviously name it River John, which is a real place. But if I had not, I think it's still very much like I don't want to say it's like every small town on the East Coast, but there is like that sort of just like you know, similarities. Like it could with some tweaks could be many places. So I think I think there's merits to, because it's a kind of like cute little Easter eggs. I've had people write me after reading the book and be like, I used to summer in River John, or I'm from River John, and like I know what you're talking about, and like so that's really nice. I tried not to put anything in here, not that I had anything to put in here that would upset people, but there's nothing particularly controversial that the narrative is saying about the town. So I think there's pros and cons, because it is cute to have those little kind of tidbits that people can like directly associate with something. But I still if you're not familiar with River John and you didn't know it was necessarily real, I don't think that it's like that specific that you can't just associate it with any small town that you personally know. I think that, I don't know if that made sense, but that's
Perfect sense. Colin, why did you pick to make up a town instead of use a real place?
The easiest answer is I didn't have to use a real place. I knew early on that I probably wasn't going to be very flattering towards whatever small towns we were set in. And so I've spent like a little bit of time in Kentville, Nova Scotia, a little bit of time in New Glasgow, and I recognize that there's a lot of town pride in those communities, and I have no beef with those towns either. I don't want to write a book insulting how they're not exactly my pace, which isn't necessarily the case, by the way. And so I fictionalized a town, which, as I said, it's not real, but in a truer sense, it is pretty real. If you set your story in essentially Springfield, which is not real, but it's familiar to everyone, it's going to be all the more relatable. And so I guess the easy answer is it gave me more options. I could do whatever I wanted in Heathering.
Great. And CS, you mentioned there's this theme running through that everybody's terrified of people from small towns.
Well, no, it's not that, don't get me wrong. I mean, for me, this setting was a character as much as the characters were a character. And I chose here because I live here and I know it. And also because I love it here. I actually do. But it was, when you're dealing with like really gruesome murders, I mean, I just thought, why name the place?
Good point.
I mean, I know that, I mean, for example, Ian Rankin, you can literally go to Edinburgh and follow your way around street names and everything. And you could almost really close in beneath their skin, find out exactly where the pub is, where that happened and where that happened, but I don't name the street specifically.
Very cool. So coming soon, walking tours of Lunenburg,
Yeah.
beneath their skin, reality tour. So I have a question for you all. As a fellow first-time novelist / grizzled veteran of the writing trade, a whole year ahead of you, when was it, if it's happened yet, because you're all successful writers now, like it or not, when was it, what was that moment where you began to feel like, wow, I'm actually a writer? Alexandra?
I mean, I think you could like make different arguments for this, because I think that like anyone who is putting, passion into writing should feel like a writer, because they are. I think it like became more real for me when, obviously it was like very exciting to have my book accepted for publication, but it like really hits the fan when your editor's like, let's go, like here are my notes. And it's like, for the first time, you kind of, not necessarily for the first time, because I feel like a lot of people, myself included, had shared their work prior to submitting it, either, with like to workshop with friends or whatever. Anyway, but when you get that critical first, review or sort of looking for like a substantial edit from your editor for the first time, and you kind of have to recalibrate these characters that have been living in your head and a plot that you're probably attached to, and it's great. It's so exciting to see someone else's perspective on this thing that for the most part has been very like internal to yourself. So I think that's a really big, fun, exciting, nerve-wracking like first thing for an author. The first time your editor comes back to you and they're like, here are my notes, and it's kind of more out there, and it's, these characters aren't just yours anymore. So that was a really big moment for me, I guess.
That's awesome. CS, when did you?
I totally agree with you, Alexandra. Totally agree. It was one thing, and I sort of felt like a writer, I suppose, when every morning I would get up and go out and start writing. That was my early morning. But you're right, it was when the editor came back, but it wasn't a jolly experience for me. I mean, my editor's great. I mean, there's no question. Whitney Moran, she was really great, but it was really hard for me. So, but yes, that did make you feel like a writer, I suppose. Yeah, I agree.
And Colin?
I guess my experience was a little bit different, if only because I had mythologized the editing process for so long, not knowing what to expect. And you hear a lot of writers love to complain about how hard it is to be a writer, which it is, but I don't think you need to be a martyr about it either. These like horror stories about John Steinbeck would go to meet with his editor and he'd leave in tears. I think that's it wasn't that experience for me at all. I had this idea that they were going to read through my book and say, "Great job, let's publish it. Also start again. It's awful." And that wasn't my experience. I found it to be pretty gratifying, and so I really enjoyed the editing experience. As to when I felt like a writer, yeah, there's probably a lot of checkpoints along the way. I think I first like wrote something creatively when I was 9 and decided it was fun and kept on doing that. But I've also always kind of felt a little bit like a fraud. I've never really had peers who were writers in the same sense. I have friends who are artistic, and I'll share my creativity with them, and they'll be very supportive. But because I didn't necessarily belong to an active writers community, I didn't necessarily feel like I'd earned the title of being a writer. And so it's like I gate kept it for myself. And even now, there's like a book in stores, and people will say, "Well, you're a writer now." And I'm like, "Yeah, I guess we'll see." So maybe I'm underconfident about it, but I think I have to get back to you on that.
Well, I've got news for you.
I agree with that too.
You're a writer. So yes, Sarah's asking in the chat, is there any special meaning behind your monkey cap?
Oh no. It's really funny. It was just, I just felt like I needed it today, and I don't know why.
I should have had a hat on this.
Well, I found this when I was in China. I was working in China, and I just saw it at a store and thought, "Oh, that's crazy," and put it on my head. And then I found out that he's a famous designer from LA. And then I was in the Lunenburg market, and some guy went, "Oh my God, he was my roommate." It's just sort of, it all linked up in a funny way, and I thought I'd wear it today. No, there's not.
Hey, you ask a novelist a simple question and you'll get a story. That's wonderful. So LA Dove in the chat liked your reading so much. They really want to know when they can see and hear from you next. So do any of you have any plans to go to any writers festivals or any other events coming up in the next foreseeable future? Colin?
I'm too busy. I have 2 cats.
Fair enough.
No, I mean, there's the festival events coming up in the next week, but it's kind of been a slow roll for me just because it's a first time experience. Doing this here now is the first time I've done anything like this. But I would certainly be open to doing readings or interacting with readers or other writers, especially now that things are starting to feel a little safer publicly. That would be wonderful.
Great. You heard it here, folks. Colin's available for bookings. CS, do you have any events or anything coming up? No. All right, we got to get more events going. Alexandra?
No, other than like I'll be around this week at a couple of things. But my mom, who's also a writer, is actually attending the Read by the Sea Literary Festival in River John at the end of this month, and I'm going to be her date. So I'm not featured, but I'll be there. So to support her. So I will be.
No way.
It'll be so that'll be fun because I've only been to River John like quite briefly since this has come out. So I'm excited to be back, and the Read by the Sea is a really great festival that I think was canceled definitely last year. I think it was canceled the last 2 years. So that's like a really exciting, it's like this amazing festival that they put on in River John. So I'm really happy to be attending this year with my mom. So
Say hi. I'm going to be there reading.
Cool.
I'm a little bit nervous now based on the I'm excited. That's great.
Oh yeah.
So you guys kind of touched on this, and maybe Alexandra, you can start. What has been like the biggest surprise for you? Because I think you've all sort of alluded to the fact that you've been mulling around books in your head for a long time. And for me personally, that first novel took at least 12 years to write. In the time it took to live it, mull it, write it. And like Colin said, I sort of mythologized the whole process in my head, and then I actually did it, and it's not as precious as you imagined it at all. But what are some of the big surprises about either writing the book, going through the editorial process and publishing it, and then this promotion part of it, which is weird and you don't really think of it until it's time to do it? Alexandra, what were any surprises for you in that?
I have worked in publishing before, so none of the editorial process was like that surprising to me, just because I was familiar with it. I think kind of touching on what Colin said earlier, like I think it's surprising how, at least me personally, how little you feel like a writer when your book is out. Like it still like doesn't really, I do the same thing when people are like, you have a book out, you're a writer. I'm like, oh, maybe, I guess. So I think that's a weird thing that is hard to prepare for. And then kind of similar to what I also said earlier, was like, it's funny when people, it's surprising to me when people come to me and I'm like, oh, I read your book, and they interpret things differently than, not necessarily than how you meant them, but just like they interpreted things differently than you always have. And because the book was like mine for so long, and now it's out there for other people to obviously interpret however they like. So I think that's really funny, and people have different takeaways, and that's really exciting to have like discussions with people. And like, oh, did you mean this? Did you mean this by that? Or like, I didn't like this character, and that character is my favorite character. So that's, I think, something that you also don't really feel prepared for. And yeah, I just had one of my friends just read it this week, and she told me she pictured one of the main characters like Timothée Chalamet, and I was very flattered. But it's just so funny because that's like such a contemporary reference, and to me, this book is so like not anchored in the past, but like it just doesn't feel like it's out there in the world where also Timothée Chalamet exists, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? So to have it out there is a very surprising and strange feeling.
That's awesome. What's been your favorite thing that through this whole process, like that you enjoyed the most?
I just like truly like, good or bad, and this sounds a little bit cheesy, I guess, but like when people tell me that they read it, and like even if they don't have to say they liked it, like that's fine. But just like it's nowadays, it's like a bit of an endeavor to read a book. It's a lot of time. So just like anyone taking the time to read it, and you know, even picking it off a shelf, like support local authors, buy local books, that kind of thing. It like truly, like this sounds so corny, but like it like blows me away when people are like, I bought your book, I read your book. Like it's just so weird. And very, yeah, I grew, as I said, my mom is a writer, so she's been publishing books since I was like a kid, or like a young teenager. So I feel very like inspired by her, and yeah, very honored that I get to also be doing what she does. So.
That's awesome.
Nice.
Colin, what about you? What's been the biggest surprise through all of this?
I mean, I agree with everything Alexandra just said. I find it very moving when somebody commits the time. When a friend comes to me who I don't even like expect it from, and they say, I committed the 6 hours necessary to reading your book. It makes me want to cry. It's wonderful. There was this barbecue that I had with my friends about a month after the book came out, gave them all enough time to have read it. And something I hadn't realized, was that there's this like kind of D-list character in the book who's just there to move the plot along at one point. He's like a bozo teenager who works at a gas station. And I named him Kyle, and I have a friend named Kyle. And all my friends immediately picked up on that. I didn't do it on purpose. It wasn't like ribbing my friend Kyle, but we had like a live reading, and Kyle was there, and his face was as red as mine. And it was this like really warm moment of acceptance for me. And so it's wonderful when strangers tell me they're buying the book, or that they read the book and that they enjoyed it. But that doesn't really feel real, because those people aren't real people to me. I really appreciate them. I hate the way that just sounded when I heard it. But when people I know and love and respect accept me and my creativity, it makes me happier than I ever thought it could be.
Awesome. CS?
Yeah, echoing all the same. I mean, if someone says that they enjoyed your book, it's just, that's crazy, right? I mean, even to think that there is a book out there is pretty mad. And also, I guess the other surprise is that after that year and a bit of making the damn thing, that's all gone, and I'm wanting to do another one, and I find that really curious. So that's a surprise as well.
That's a good point. Is something I learned the hard way is if you write one novel, people are going to start asking about a second novel.
I know.
I wrote one. What more do you need?
Can I take a break?
Yeah. So what about you guys? What's next? What are you working on now? When's the next one coming out? When can we read it? Colin?
My story's done, but I will definitely work on new things. In fact, I have like a first draft of a new novel that I'm very pleased about, and it's totally different from what I've written before. I've been asked a couple of times, do I want to write a sequel to Short Mercy? And I just don't see where it could go. It feels very concluded to me. Yeah, I've written something that feels a little bit more YA, in fact. And I'm excited to pursue that further. It's definitely kept me creating for the last 9 months or so. But I don't know, sky's the limit.
Awesome. YA's where the money's at, I've heard, right, Alexandra?
Yeah, for sure.
CS, what are you working on now?
Well, knowing now that I know a first draft doesn't mean anything at all, but I have a first draft done.
Oh, that's great.
So in other words, there's some scribbles down for sure. Yeah.
And Alexandra?
Well, if I keep to my current schedule, the next one should be done in a cool another 10 years. So that's nice. I'm working on another YA mystery that is set at a girls' boarding school about a field hockey team, which is great because I know nothing about field hockey. So that's good. But that's on the go right now. But yeah, we'll see. It's definitely, my heart is with YA and potentially maybe middle grade one day. But I like to write for young people. So I think I will definitely be in that realm, hopefully again.
I'm amazed that you were able to hold your focus on the same project since you were a child. I find that that's my biggest downfall is that I lose momentum and I just lose interest, and I've probably abandoned good ideas. How do you think you were able to maintain that?
I think I obviously took breaks from it and came back, but I don't know. People have asked me that, why did I stick with it for so long? I think it's because it was just constantly evolving. So it almost wasn't like I set out when I was in grade 8 and was like, I'm writing this crime small town novel. It evolved so much, truly. So it was always kind of changing. It just was sort of the characters and the setting that was remaining the same, with sort of the same initial setup. So it's a completely different project, but I definitely took a break throughout high school, I think, and really came back to it when I was in university. And I had so much written of it. I had this terrible 140,000 word draft that I, had from high school, and I kind of sat myself down and was like, we could probably clean this up. So,
do you think it has something to do with you have an idea and you want to do it, but it takes you that long to get your sort of confidence up to actually do it?
Kind of. I think, yeah. I mean, I was young when I started it, so I wasn't, sitting there when I was 16 being like, I gotta get this to a publisher.
Yeah.
So but I think, yeah, it does take a long time for
That
anybody.
happened.
It doesn't matter, what age you are, to kind of get it actualized enough that you feel confident sending it out.
Yeah. Right.
So yeah, it just was, I've been writing my whole life. So it was just sort of, even when I was writing something else, I've always just been writing that book, also it always just came back to that. So I think it would have been an injustice to myself and to my 13-year-old self that read this first chapter in my grade 8 English class if I never finished it. So.
that blows me away. Do you still have that 140,000 word draft somewhere? Could
I
I
do.
buy it? Because I need a novel.
You-
I got nothing.
I had a handwritten in those sort of looking for like black and white speckled notebooks. I had 4 of those handwritten, and that was one of the original drafts of the book that I wrote in like a family road trip in a car. So I have
Hey,
those.
yeah, that's going to come out as the director's cut one day. And
Exactly.
put
be
your
really
grandkids
long.
through university.
Very gritty.
That's amazing. We've got just a couple minutes left. If there's anyone in the chat with one final question, speak now or forever hold your peace. If you don't get your questions now, though, you can go on Thursday to the Halifax Central Library to the gala. There's still tickets available. And you can corner them and ask them questions, or just give them a high five. I wanted to ask, on a scale of 1 to Will Smith slapping Chris Rock, how mad will you be if you don't win on Thursday? You don't have to answer that.
That's not a good question.
That's why I told people in the chat to ask questions. I'm a terrible interviewer. No, I want to just thank the people in the chat and the people who joined us today for coming and participating on Saturday morning. This has been great. There's a great turnout. You never know what to expect when you're up with the birds. I'd like to thank our authors, Colin, CS, and Alexandra. Congratulations, you guys, on writing a novel. The first one, I think, is the hardest because it takes 10 years to come out. So congratulations on just doing that, but also congratulations on all the recognition you're getting. It's very well deserved. Everyone who's seeing this, go out and buy the books, read the books, say nice things about the books to your friends. Go on Goodreads and downvote all the bad reviews, because sorry, I'm a little bitter. And remember, the Atlantic Book Awards Festival is going on all week. There's a whole bunch of other events in person in the Halifax area and also virtual, so you can join in from Pennsylvania or Cape Breton or wherever you are. AtlanticBookAwards.ca is the place to find out about that. On Monday night is the Nova Scotia Book Awards, which you can tune into live from the Halifax City Hall. Thursday night, like I said, is the big gala. I'm sure there'll be free cheese there. So if nothing else, go get some free cheese and rub elbows with the best of the best in Atlantic Canada. Like I said at the beginning, this was co-presented by the Cabot Trail Writers Festival, which along with Read by the Sea is one of the best festivals going. So check that out at the end of September, cabottrailwritersfestival.com. You can come see Alexandra in the audience in River John, where it'll be teeming with drama and crime, I'm sure. So yeah, that's our hour. I want to thank you all for coming. Thank
Nice
our
to meet
writers.
you guys.
Yeah.
Nice to meet
guys
you
too.
all.
So nice to
I'll
meet
see
you
you
all.
out there on the
Good luck.
circuit.
Yep.
Be sure to say hi. And that's it. So thank you all and have a great weekend.
Thanks, Morgan.
Thank you so much.